In case you have been really out of touch with the world, I'm here to inform you that Marco Rubio is running for president. And that's kind of good news for the Democrats in Florida, because he's going to be out of the Senate. This gives us the opportunity to elect a new Florida senator. And we all know that the vast majority of the present Senate is a bunch of old, angry, self-serving, dare I say, waspy guys. Sorry. So if we had a Florida senator wish list, it would probably include many of the following attributes. The candidate would be under retirement age, maybe even young, smart, with a legal and maybe even military background, committed to helping those who are less fortunate, a self-starter who earned what they have through hard work and relates well to a wide variety of people. Maybe, it would be really interesting, if the candidate would be an upbeat, assertive, African-American woman. Who, as the child of a diplomat and a military veteran, has lived all over the world. Oh my God. And speaks several languages. Oh my God. And maybe, this candidate would not be in the pocket of the good old boy, moneyed Florida Democratic Party. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Pam Keith.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sumter County, the Villages. What an honor and a privilege to be here with so many fabulous Democrats. I don't know about everybody else in this race, but I'm a lifelong Democrat. It's something I am profoundly proud of. So, I'd like to start a little bit about my background, although I got such a phenomenal introduction. But I am the daughter of a U.S. diplomat. And what that meant, I mean, it doesn't really mean anything unless I can explain the context. You see, from 0 to 6 years old, I lived in Middle Eastern countries. I lived in Turkey, Morocco, and Syria. And during that time, I learned a few things about myself, but the most important thing about me was that I was an American, and that was really special. I had this thing called a passport. And at 5 years old, I didn't know what a passport was, other than it was special. And mine was particularly special because it said American. Yeah, that meant something. I was raised in a household of a diplomatic household, so my father and my mother taught me from early on what it meant to serve your country, that was a privilege, something to be taken very seriously, and that I, even as a small child, had to make sure I didn't embarrass them, but also didn't embarrass my country, that I was a representative of the country. From my nascence, I was a representative of my country, and that meant a lot. I learned more about what that meant when I was about 5.5 to 6 years old. I had my best friend in Damascus. It was a young girl named Tima Daoudi, and Tima and I were running buddies. We did everything together. We did have one problem. Tina liked to play with dolls, and I did not. I like to run, and I like to climb, and I like to play war, and I always like to orchestrate what everybody was doing. I don't know why. And so Tima and I had this constant conflict because I kept telling Tima that I was going to be a doctor, and Tima kept telling me, girls can't be doctors. Of course, I go back to Mom and I say, Mom, Tima says I can't be a doctor. And she said, well, honey, in Tima's world, that may be true. Because in an Islamic country, girls can't be doctors. They can be mothers and wives. But you're not from an Islamic country, Pam. You are an American. And that means you can be anything you want to be. I cannot tell you how inspiring and happy that made me as a 6-year-old child. At about 6 and a half, I moved back to the United States because my parents, unfortunately, were going through a divorce. So I went from being an American overseas to figuring out what it meant to be an American at home. And I was 6 by then. You know, I had a consciousness. I knew who I was. I had a sense of identity and a sense of self. And so when I got to Oakland, California, I was really surprised that there were people who told me there were places I shouldn't go, and things I shouldn't do, and things I shouldn't say. I start to see these tensions, and I didn't understand it. I was so confused. My English wasn't even that good. I mean, I spoke French at school and Arabic with my friends, and then when I got home, I kind of spoke English, and people just kind of made fun of me. I was a weirdo. But then we moved to Lexington, Kentucky. Yeah, grown, yeah. We moved to Lexington because my mother had finally finished her college education, which she made me very aware how important that was. But she got a scholarship to the University of Kentucky to study economics. She called a realtor in Lexington, asked for a house. We got one. And when we got out there, the realtor was shocked to find out that my mother was African American. So we were the only black family in the neighborhood, the only one. And in the fall, when I started school, it was the first year that those schools were actually physically desegregated. Lexington, Kentucky was one of the last areas to desegregate. So they bussed in children, and it was a new thing. And they didn't know what to do with these African American children, so what they did was they put them in the back of the class. I had a teacher who put all of the black children in the back of the class, and me, front and center, just to make a point. And she conducted class as if the black students were not there. So she would ask questions, the black students would raise their hand, and she would just ignore them. At the end of the grading period, she gave all of us C's. And when my mother came to speak to her, because my mother knew something was wrong, she knew me, right? I got A's in the subjects that I liked, bad grades in the subjects I was bored by. But she was used to seeing this smorgasbord of grades. She goes to the teacher, and the teacher tells my mother that she's doing me a favor. And my mother took exception to that. Luckily, by then, the school had hired one black teacher, and I was put in her class, and I was able to succeed. But I wondered what happened to all of those other children in the back of the class, whose parents maybe didn't have the wherewithal to come forward and say something. I still wonder what happened to those children. After Lexington, I moved back with my dad. We lived in a very suburban life. We lived in a suburb of DC. On Saturday mornings, we'd get up and make pancakes, Dad and me, because we were the early risers. And Dad would tell me stories about the Navy. We'd sing songs, and we'd make pancakes. It was daddy-daughter time. It was important. But that was when I started to learn about the military, about what it meant to put on the uniform, about what it meant to serve your country. From there, we moved to Brazil. And Brazil was a wonderful experience. I got to learn a whole new language, a whole new culture, a whole new worldview. And I loved it. I did. But boy, did I miss home. I missed America a lot. And that's when I started to develop that identity, that sense of, hey, this is what I miss. I miss the diversity. I miss the different kinds of people at home and the things that I see. I missed football. I missed Pop-Tarts, little things I missed. And so when I got back to the United States, I was so excited to be home. I went to high school and college in California. And then I went across the country to Boston College to go to law school. And I loved my time at BC, but I did learn another thing about myself in that process. I don't like cold weather. After my time at BC, I had some options. I could go to a firm, I could try to go clerk, I could try to do a small practice, go for myself, but I had to keep in mind that, you know, I had $86,000 worth of debt. Instead of going to the big firm right away or go clerk, I decided that this was my opportunity to give back, to serve. And so I decided to commission into the United States Navy. Now I tell you, I thought my dad was going to be really proud of me, and at first his reaction was, He was not nuts about the idea of his daughter being amongst all those sailors. And I can understand that. But after I completed my training and at my graduation, my father came up to Newport, Rhode Island to see me graduate with my uniform on. And it was a surprise to him that I had been selected battalion commander of my class. And at that point, we were no longer daddy and daughter, we were mutual sailors. And it was a wonderful thing to share with my dad. He was so proud of me, and I was so proud of him, and we bonded in a different way. I loved my time in the United States Navy. I was the one who was always raising my hand to say, I'll go do anything, I'll volunteer, I'll do this, I'll do that. I wanted to be the best sailor I could possibly be. So my first duty station was Norfolk, Virginia. My job was to defend sailors who got themselves into trouble. I tell you, I didn't think I had the temperament for defense. I really thought I was going to be a prosecuting attorney, you know? I wanted litigation experience, so I was glad I got in the courtroom. But, you know, these guys did bad things. They did bad things. But I was challenged to figure out what to do with someone who has done something bad. Could I find a way to advocate for that person anyway? Could I find a way to stand up for that person and say, yeah, he did something bad, but there's still something human about this person. There's still something redeemable about this person. This person deserves a second chance. And it challenged me to do that, to find the humanity in someone who has made choices I thought were very wrong. And sometimes it was difficult for me. But I knew it was my mission. And in the Navy, you don't get to pick your missions. You do what you're told, you do what you have to do, and you do it to the best of your ability. And I thank God for that, because it helped me to become a much stronger advocate. When I left the Navy, when I came back to, well, my first duty station was Norfolk, and when I left Norfolk, I thought I would just be going to some other duty station in the United States. But remember, I told you, I'm the one that liked to raise my hand. And so when a job in Bahrain came around, I raised my hand. Now my thinking here, now stay with me. My thinking here was that I was so junior, no way was I going to get that job. It was for a second tour lieutenant job. I had only been on the job in Norfolk for about a year less, really. But I had a really big caseload, and I'd been doing cases all over the waterfront. I'd developed a reputation, and my boss calls me into his office, and he says, Lieutenant, do you really want to go to Bahrain? Now, those of you who have served know that there's only one answer to that question, right? Of course, I had to say, well, of course, yes. And so I got deployed to Bahrain. And what was going on in Bahrain at the time was that we had high operational tempo policing Saddam Hussein. Those of you who remember, we had a no-fly zone over the Kurds. We had a no-fly zone over the south. We had marine interdiction operations to stop smuggling of oil. So we had a whole lot of Navy ships in the Persian Gulf at one time. And my job was to fly to each of the ships and deal with their problem children, either through court-martial or administrative hearing. And I served every kind of unit in that area. I served Marines. I even did some Air Force and Army cases. I dealt with pilots. I dealt with submarine folk. I got to see the whole panoply of naval operations. Operators operating operationally. And I learned a lot about inspections. I learned, because that's what was happening. We had UN inspectors in Iraq, and Saddam Hussein, being who he was, he would figure out a way to play what I call the inspection okey doke. You know, the inspectors are supposed to be somewhere, but all of a sudden the road has a blockage. Or all of a sudden the doors are locked and nobody has the key. All of a sudden he's misdirected to a wrong location. We get mad, he gets spun up, he kicks the UN inspectors up, and then we prepare to attack. Everybody gets spun up. We're in threat con Charlie. And then when he realizes we're actually going to do something, he backs down. And then we back down. And we played that little seesaw game for a while. So I understand when my more conservative brothers and sisters are worried about what a nuclear deal with Iran would look like and what inspections would look like, because we have some experience with people who are willing to agree to inspections but not follow through. I understand what they're worried about. I do get that. And so I think that I bring a certain perspective to that kind of discussion. But I am at heart the daughter of a diplomat, and I've never forgotten that. I know that our country has gotten far further, and international relations have gotten far further from engagement than from military conflict. So I get back, I'm in Washington, and I realize I gotta pay off these loans. And so I get a job. I get a good job with a very big firm, and it's a crucible. You know, you have to prove that you can hang with these very, very qualified type A personalities. And I'm working for big Fortune 500 companies. I'm learning how they operate and how they're structured and their employment policies and their labor policies. And I begin to see what's going on with all of this. And I decided, I was chosen to work on the labor side of the house. Why? Because labor law is relational law. You don't just win a labor case and it all goes away. You have to maintain that relationship with your union. So you not only have to know how to win, you have to know how to win without destroying the relationship. I learned labor law because I thought it was fascinating. But I also knew that when you get good outcomes on both sides, everybody does better. So I had to learn how to be creative. I had to figure out strategies on how to keep that relationship going so that you don't walk away from the bargaining table with two really, really angry parties. That taught me a lot. It also taught me a really granular understanding of our labor laws. I understand why union penetration has gone down from 22% to 6% recently. I know why that's happening. And I can shed some light into how we can reverse the tide, because quite frankly, I think we absolutely need to reverse that tide. Not everybody in America needs to be in a union, but never doubt the power of organized negotiations. So after that, I was brought to here. Florida Power and Light called me and said, hey, we have a job in Florida. Now, I don't know anybody in Florida. I didn't know anybody in Florida. And I was like, why would I do that? But see, they were smart. I didn't give them credit because they called me in February and I was living in Chicago. And I had no idea what West Palm Beach, Florida would feel like in February till I got there. And then I was like, oh, snap. This feels good. And they offered me a great opportunity. My job at Florida Power and Light was to be senior labor counsel, was to interface with the unions that operate our nuclear facilities. So this is a good gig, mind you. It's in the sun. And I'm in-house counsel. I have one client. It's a good gig. And you know what was great about it? Not only did I continue to develop my understanding of how to build relationships with unions, but more importantly, I learned a thing or two about energy. I don't know if you know this, but we've got some energy issues in this country. Right? I learned that clean and renewable energy is where it's at. And I also learned what the challenges are in terms of making clean and renewable energy the dominant source of electricity in our country. And I know that those obstacles are surmountable. They are. We just have to choose as a nation to make a priority out of it. I gave you this long, protracted story about my background so that you could understand that each step in my journey has prepared me for this race. Because you see, the first question I get when I meet people on the campaign trail is, why is she running for Senate? I mean, she's never run for anything before. Why so high? And I tell people a variety of things, but first I tell them, look, serving your country is valuable no matter what level you run. I don't believe that there is something less valuable about being on the school board or being a county commissioner or city councilor. Those are incredibly valuable and important positions, never doubt that. But you gotta go where you know. And the path that I have walked upon has given me the knowledge, the background, and the skill set for those national issues, those issues that I know, like energy policy, like our military, like veterans affairs, like foreign affairs and politics. I know the difference between Sunni and Shia because I've lived there. I know that there are conflicts that we cannot fix. I have a profound respect for our military. I wore the uniform. I know how hard it is to be that far away from your family and how hard it is on your family to not know if you are safe. I know that, so if we're gonna go that route, we dang well better know what we're doing. As a child of a diplomat, I understand how important it is that we engage with everybody, whether we like them or not. We have never sanctioned any ruler out of existence, anywhere. Last time I checked, North Korea, Cuba, Russia, hey, their leaders are still there. Iran, you don't sanction leaders away, but you can change the mind of the people if you engage. But I'm not a Pollyanna. I know that there is an immense and important role that our United States military plays. We are the leader of the free world, and quite frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't want China or Russia to be the leader of the world. I know that there's no such thing as diplomacy without backup. And we are the world's backup. It's a big responsibility. And I'm glad that we shoulder it because we'll shoulder it better than anybody else. We have the most effective, well-trained, well-supplied military in the world. And that's a great thing. Where we fall down is how we treat our military when they come home. That's where our problem is. Having been in that service, having seen how people deal with fear and anxiety, trauma, they get home and they can't reintegrate. And they don't know why. They're afraid to admit that they have nightmares and night sweats. They're afraid that people are going to look at them as weak because they can't relate to their neighbors. And then they retreat into themselves more and more. And then we hear the 22 people kill themselves each day, our veterans that have served our country. Now something is terribly wrong with that. And somebody has to have the heart and the passion to stand up and say, hey, we can do better than this, and I'm going to be that person.